Have you ever stopped to think about why certain geometric shapes seem to whisper something profound to your soul? Why certain numerical patterns insist on appearing repeatedly in your life, as if they were trying to capture your attention? Why, when contemplating certain ancestral images, you feel an inexplicable familiarity, as if you were looking at a mirror of something that lives inside you, but that you cannot name? My name is Sirius, and for years I have delved into the forgotten texts of mystical traditions, into scriptures that libraries rarely show, into scrolls that scholars hesitate to discuss openly. And what I discovered goes far beyond what any superficial spirituality course can offer. I discovered that there exists a language prior to words, prior to alphabets, prior even to the first documented civilizations. A language that was not invented by humanity, but rediscovered, as if it had always been engraved in the deepest layers of our collective consciousness. This language needs no translation, because it operates on a level that transcends the rational mind. It speaks directly to that part of you that exists before thoughts, before beliefs, before everything that was taught or conditioned. And here's what few people realize. If this language has the power to awaken something dormant within you, then logically there must be something or someone committed to ensuring that you never learn to decipher it. The Gnostic texts, those ancient manuscripts discovered in caves and hidden for centuries, speak of subtle forces that operate behind the scenes of perceived reality. These forces don't work through direct confrontation or obvious violence. Their strategy is infinitely more sophisticated. They invert, distort, and recontextualize the very visual codes that were designed to guide you back to your luminous essence. They transform sacred maps into cultural noise. They convert spiritual keys into mere decoration. They take what should be a beacon and transform it into just another thing to be consumed and forgotten. What I'm going to share with you now is not abstract theory or distant philosophy. It's an invitation to recognize the language that has always been around you, but that has been systematically disconnected from its true purpose. You will learn not only what these ancestral visual codes are, but why they were obscured, how they work, and most importantly, how you can begin to use them to decipher reality in a way that most people will never experience. Because once you understand the real grammar of these symbols, something changes permanently. You stop seeing the world as a random collection of events and begin to perceive it as a coded narrative, a living text written in a language that your soul recognizes instantly, even if your conscious mind needs time to remember. Long before any writing system was developed, before emperors engraved their conquests in stone or priests recorded their rituals on papyrus, humanity was already communicating through something profoundly more ancient and universally understood than any spoken language could be. Archaeologists excavating sites on continents completely isolated from each other continue to find the same visual patterns repeated: spirals carved into rocks, hands stamped in caves, eyes sculpted in temples, serpents intertwined in artifacts, stars mapped in megalithic constructions. These cultures never had contact with each other. No vessel crossed oceans to share these designs. No messenger traveled thousands of miles to teach these forms. And yet, there they are, the same symbols, appearing independently in every corner of the globe, as if all of humanity were tuned into an invisible frequency, receiving transmissions from a common source that transcends geography and linear time. This didn't happen because our ancestors were more creative or artistic. It happened because they weren't inventing these symbols, they were remembering them. For ancient civilizations, a symbol was never just a pleasant visual representation or a decorative element to embellish objects. A symbol was a technology. It was a portal. It was a convergence point where the visible, tangible world met invisible dimensions of consciousness and meaning. The Gnostic teachings, particularly those preserved in texts like the Gospel of Philip, articulate something revolutionary. Truth cannot be transmitted naked, directly, because the conditioned human mind cannot process it in its pure form. Therefore, truth always arrives dressed in types, in images, in archetypes that function as transmission vehicles. For the Gnostics, material reality itself was not the endpoint, but rather a symbolic projection of higher realities. Everything you see, every shape, every proportion, every natural cycle, every mathematical pattern that governs everything from galaxies to the structure of your DNA. All of this is code, an encrypted reminder of your true origin in realms beyond dense matter. Matter is not evil or illusory in the sense of not existing. It is symbolic. It is a language. Your body, with its embedded sacred geometry, is a symbol. The cycles of the moon, the seasons, the spiral movement of galaxies, all of this are sentences in a cosmic text that is constantly communicating something about who you really are beneath the temporary personality and biographical memories. But something happened over the millennia. As empires rose and control systems consolidated, these sacred symbols began to be appropriated. Priests guarded them behind temple doors. Kings used them to legitimize temporal power. Institutions reinterpreted them to align with specific narratives of authority and obedience. And then came the age of literalism, where metaphor was confused with historical fact, where the inner journey was externalized into empty rituals, where the map of the soul was reduced to superstition or completely discarded as meaningless coincidence. In this vacuum of understanding, new interpretations emerged quietly. And this is where the Gnostic teachings become disturbingly relevant. According to these texts, the forces they called intermediaries between spirit and matter, these entities didn't want to destroy the symbols. Destroying would draw attention. It would create martyrs of knowledge. It would be obviously suspicious. Instead, the strategy was much more subtle and devastatingly effective. Invert the meaning. Take the serpent, for example. Over millennia, in virtually every wisdom tradition, from Indian Kundalini to Egyptian mysteries, the serpent represented cyclical renewal, profound transformation, and the awakening of ascending vital energy. But observe how, in later narratives, this same image was recoded as synonymous with betrayal, deception, and spiritual fall. The eye, which in contemplative traditions symbolized inner vision, the ability to perceive beyond superficial appearances, was gradually reconfigured as an emblem of oppressive surveillance and external control. The flame, which always represented the inextinguishable light of divine consciousness within each being, began to be associated with eternal punishment instead of eternal illumination. Understand the perverse genius of this approach. The symbols don't disappear. They remain visible, remain present in culture, in art, in architecture, but their connection to the original meaning has been severed. It's like giving someone a book in a language they can no longer read. The book is there, the pages are intact, the words are clearly printed, but the person remains completely disconnected from the message the book carries. And yet, even through all these centuries of inversion and confusion, something persisted. People still feel a magnetic attraction to certain symbols, even without consciously understanding why. They tattoo them on their skin. They hang them on chains around their necks. They unconsciously draw them in the margins of notebooks. They see them in repetitive dreams. This impulse is not fashion or coincidence. It's the divine spark within you, recognizing fragments of your own story, trying to remember the complete narrative that was fragmented and scattered over time. And here is the fundamental paradox that the Gnostic texts highlight. The very symbols that certain forces tried to obscure are woven directly into the fabric of your own consciousness. They are not external to you. They are you. You don't learn these symbols as you learn a new foreign language. You recognize them the same way you recognize a familiar face in a crowd, even after years of separation. When you begin to see symbols not as arbitrary shapes, but as messages directed specifically to the deepest layers of your perception, something profound readjusts. The apparent chaos of the world begins to reveal order. The random shows itself to be intentional. The meaningless transforms into significantly coded, and you realize you were never lost. You just forgot how to read the signs that were always pointing the way back home. What if everything that ever provoked in you that strange sensation of recognition, that inexplicable chill, that moment of déjà vu when contemplating an ancient image, wasn't new to you at all? What if you weren't learning about symbols for the first time, but simply recalling something you already knew before entering this body, before acquiring this personality, before all the layers of social and cultural conditioning were deposited upon your original consciousness. The Gnostic teachings propose something radical. The soul doesn't speak through verbal concepts or logical arguments. It communicates through archetypal images, through patterns, through forms that existed before incarnation into matter. When you encounter a symbol that carries genuine power, something inside you immediately whispers a silent confirmation. You know that you know this, even though all your conscious memories say otherwise. And this is precisely why symbols can completely bypass the analytical intellect. A simple form can detonate profound emotions, can catalyze sudden clarity, can make you feel as if the symbol itself were looking back at you with mutual recognition. But in Gnostic mythologies, the intermediary forces they describe understood this mechanism too. They knew that symbols don't just passively represent meaning. They activate processes. They function as neural and spiritual switches. They are keys that open specific locks in the architecture of consciousness. And a human being who remembers their origin beyond this material reality, who reconnects with their fundamental luminous nature, that being automatically begins to operate outside the systems of influence that depend on ignorance and forgetfulness to function. So the strategy wasn't to erase the symbols, it was to disconnect them from their activating power. Imagine receiving a detailed map of buried treasure, but never having learned to interpret the legends, the scales, the orientations. The map remains in your hands. All the necessary information is technically present, but you remain lost, unable to follow the path that is literally drawn right in front of you. This is exactly how the Gnostic texts describe the operation of these intermediary forces at their fundamental core. Consider the spiral, perhaps the oldest symbol that humanity has ever engraved. For the mystical traditions of all continents, the spiral always represented the journey inward, the progressive unfolding of consciousness, the path of return to the original source. Every lineage of contemplative wisdom used it. Every ancestral culture sculpted it in stone, even before developing writing systems. It resonated universally because it touched on something deeply true about the nature of spiritual evolution. Today, you see it as a decorative motif on fabrics, as a graphic design element in corporate logos, as a pleasant aesthetic pattern without any context or depth. The form survived but was emptied, transformed from a spiritual technology into just another consumable visual component. Or observe the circle with a central point, which in countless traditions represented the exact moment of divine emanation, the precise point where pure consciousness touches and animates matter. This symbol carried the mystery of creation, of spirit becoming form. Now it's simply a geometric figure in textbooks, stripped of any sacred resonance. Or the eye, which in mystery schools always symbolized inner vision, the soul's capacity to directly perceive truths that physical senses can never access. Somewhere along the way, this same symbol was reconfigured to evoke fear, surveillance, external control, sinister conspiracy. The meaning was inverted to its exact opposite, transforming an invitation to look inward into a warning to fear being watched. In the Gnostic scriptures, this was not a natural or accidental evolution. It was a deliberate reconfiguration, a strategic inversion. They emptied the symbols from within. They severed the connection between the external form and the internal activation. They transformed sacred reminders into soulless decorations, or worse, into symbols of fear and control. The human mind can forget, can be conditioned, can be confused. But the soul keeps the original memory intact. And that's why symbols don't just carry meaning, they restore ancestral memory. Think about why certain geometric forms, perfect triangles, complex mandalas, repeated hexagons, can capture your attention effortlessly. Why sacred geometry seems familiar, even if you've never studied it formally. Why some symbols seem to vibrate, pulse, glow with an energy that you can't put into words, but that you definitely feel on a visceral level. The reason is that every symbol operates simultaneously on two distinct levels. The first level is the form that your eyes register, the outer pattern, the visual configuration. The second level is the silent stirring that arises within you, the inner awakening, the sensation that something ancient is moving just below the surface of your everyday consciousness. According to Gnostic teachings, the intermediary forces can distort external meaning, can manipulate cultural interpretations, can control institutional narratives. But they cannot touch this inner activation, because this activation happens at a level of reality to which they don't have complete access. That's why symbols have survived every empire, every religion, every attempt to rewrite the history of human knowledge. Because symbols are not intellectual artifacts or cultural decorations, they are memory conduits embedded in the very structure of your consciousness, installed before you entered this specific world. And here is where understanding deepens even more significantly. You were never meant to analyze symbols with the logical mind. You were designed to feel them, to let them resonate in the deepest chambers of your being. You weren't supposed to decode them through linear reasoning. You were supposed to allow them to awaken what reasoning forgot long ago. The ancient masters understood this completely. They preserved their symbolic wisdom in stories, in diagrams, in metaphors transmitted through generations. Because the true power of a symbol is never in what it explains intellectually, but in what it unlocks experientially within you. So the real question becomes, if symbols are keys and your soul is the lock, what exactly were they designed to open? What specific memory are they trying to restore in you? What truth about your identity becomes impossible to deny when you finally learn to see through the eyes of the soul instead of the eyes of conditioning? The answers to these questions don't just decode symbols. They reveal the complete blueprint of your true innate power. And that's where genuine revelation begins, where everything changes permanently and irreversibly.